Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with Christine Twyman, and she is an awesome actor, writer, director, producer, and probably a whole slew of other things I don't know about yet. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm also a swordsman. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
Like
kidding.
working on our theory for cold fusion. So, we met at the Culver City Film Festival for a project we both worked on called Body Count. So, just to kind of get things going here, just let people know kind of how you got brought into that project.
So Jen Nangle, the producer and like star of the project, also a very multifaceted woman herself, editing everything. She she actually wanted to work on a project that showcased female stories and she asked like there were I know that there were different writers, of different genders that worked on it, but she did ask, since I do a lot of female focused work, if she could add a female screenwriter into the mix as well. One of several amazing women that were asked to be on the on the project. So yeah, and she's just kind of like, "Do you want to do it?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" So
I have to say, like, oh man, there were so many great scenes in that movie, but I had not seen the whole thing put together until I went to the premiere. And I thought at the premiere, like one of the scenes that got like the biggest response and the hugest laugh is that scene. I think it's like you're in bed and you're on the phone, and then like you kick somebody out of the bed.
oh yeah. I kicked my, I guess, one night stand out of the bed.
But just the way he was just kind of like, and you were like, get it out. That was great. So I was happy for you for that because people were talking about that in the lobby, afterwards. So awesome for you. So I guess hop back in your Wayback Machine of choice and let everybody kind of know how you got, interested in horror movies and filmmaking. Do you remember, like, were you a teenager? Were you a kid? Were you something you saw where you're like, ooh, I want to do that?
Um, Not exactly. I think my way of getting into it was like a lot of tiny parts. One horror, it was really funny when I was a kid, like before maybe the age of 12, horror movies used to scare the crap out of me. Like I was like, I didn't want to watch horror movies. I used to have nightmares about Chucky, because I think I saw
Scary
like a
doll. It's a scary doll.
thing. Yeah, like meanwhile, now one of my favorite series, like watching all of the Chucky movies is like something I do for funsies and I laugh. But I think for me, horror was specifically I was afraid of a lot of horror, and so me being me, I was like, cool. So if I'm scared of it, then that means I must clearly go directly at it. So I just started watching more horror movies, and then kind of over time just realized there's not so much to be afraid of. And now I like look for horror movies that actually make me feel like unnerved or scared because I want to know how they do it, and I want that. But and then I guess for film, that one was, I think, really kind of a combination of when I was younger, I wanted to do so many things. Like I was actually really big into science. But a big part of why I liked science and I also liked a lot of art was because I got to witness a lot of that on movie screens and on stages and stuff. I had a mom that really fostered a sense of, like, we didn't grow up with much money, but if she could put money into like taking us to a ballet or something, she would try to do that. So I grew up with someone that really fostered my sense of art, and then one day I decided to go to college for acting.
So you were talking about your mom taking you around to these events and things like that. And I think that that's great because as parents, we just get so busy and we are so focused on just trying to make ends meet and we don't realize that the kids are just growing so fast and they're like little sponges and they suck up everything, all the information. So that really makes me happy to hear that, you had that kind of experience growing up. I think that's awesome. Um, so jumping back into the film festival thing, I know you have a pilot that's going around right now called Bite. So tell everybody what that's about and how it came together.
So Bite is what's the best way to sum this up? Bite is basically just a vampire werewolf um horror fantasy essentially, where two kind of, I don't want to call them star-crossed because I feel like that implies like romance, and I don't
Like
think that's
Twilight
quite
or
where the
something.
direction. Yeah, it's more just like um they're two, like a vampire and a werewolf who are both um essentially in the middle of situations they don't want to be in the middle of. Like she kind of is a vampire who's under a coven that's led by a very persuasive vampire.
So it sounds like a pretty interesting and intense story. So was it based on something that you originally came up with yourself? Because I think people would be curious about that.
So it's actually originally based on a short film that a friend of mine, my friend Peter Brown, who's also a writer, director, actor,
Mhm.
he and I wanted to do something during the pandemic. We were coming up with different projects, and this was something that was like a concept that we came. Actually, sorry, we didn't want to do it during the pandemic. We wanted to do something before the pandemic. And this project came up, and then we decided we couldn't. It was actually supposed to be just a short, like a 10-minute short. We wrote it, we decided we couldn't make it because then the pandemic started and we had too many, like it was like a cast of 8 people. We were like, there's no way, we don't really know what to do. Like there were no like regulations in place yet. It's everything had just kind of shut down. Um, which ended up being kind of lucky for me because the project got put on the back burner. We did do some other things during the pandemic, like safely, of course, but small, like much smaller cast, like a group of like 3 or 4 of us. Um, that all agreed to be part of it. But time passed, and this kind of pilot kept or this short film kept kind of like sloshing around in my head. And I had another idea that was interesting, but not quite fully formed. And then at some point, they came together in my brain. While simultaneously, I made friends with some actors who just kind of inspired the characters. Um, and it developed from there. Like it was like a combination, like a mishmash of different little inspirations that kind of came together. And I went to my writing partner, Peter, and I was like, hey, so can I take our script and make it a pilot? I really want to make like a series out of the concept. And he was like, sure, go for it. So so he let me run with it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So does that kind of dovetail into Knock 'em Dead Productions? Was that kind of like the first project that you kind of got going under that banner, or were there others before that under that?
The first one technically was one that we did during the pandemic. So it was a cast of uh was it 3 people, including me. And Peter actually was the director for it, and our cinematographer Quinn Wright. And we all kind of got together and took a couple of DSLRs and shot our first, like it was like a web series pilot, kind of sci-fi horror, um, that has also been in some film festivals. And, I'm kind of simultaneously trying to get funding for both of these things, I guess, to move them forward. But yeah, the first one was Complex, the sci-fi horror. So
So I guess I guess maybe speak on that for a little bit because I think people would be interested to know like what it takes to kind of get an independent production company off the ground and licensing and all that stuff and putting a crew together. So kind of how, I mean, were you just kind of fed up and not being able to call the shots, look for locations and equipment and stuff like that, or where did it come from?
I think I was fed up personally with like having to wait for someone to cast you for you to be able to do anything interesting. Even if someone does cast you, it may not be something that you really want to do. Like it may not be something you're passionate about. You may not get a lot of opportunities to showcase what you like. So it was a lot easier to just like, you know, let's all do something. Like originally it was just like a quick, let's all do something together. And then I realized I enjoyed the process quite a bit and I liked being able to like I also do a lot of writing, and so I liked being able to create, like I, you know, take some of my scripts and feel like it was in my hands to be able to create them. As far as learning the legal stuff, that's like a slow learning process for me. Like Bite was my second project. The first was Complex. Complex was like $400. And then like we literally like I like by fluke, it was like we bought snacks and we needed a terabyte and you know like things like that. And the next one when I did Bite like what a year and a half later, that was a $4,000 project, which was a crazy jump for me. So I've been kind of like trying to learn bit by bit everything. The next project I'm working on is actually supposed to be with Tracy Burr, who also is in Body Count. She's also a talented writer and kind of like a burgeoning producer herself. And that one, we're going to have to go through the process of like SAG and everything, which is going to be a new one for me. And I'm like in the midst of like trying to learn how LLCs work so that I can do that with the production company. But I think what's beneficial about like a production company, a film production company, is that for the most part, um, I feel like you can just kind of go for it because again, as long as like no one else has the exact same name as you, which is something you want to do some research on. Like as long
Yeah.
as someone like there is a company out there that has a close name that is a theatrical company in like a small town somewhere. So like I was like, okay, but like that I don't really feel like that'll be a problem. But for the most part, you don't want somebody that has like the same name as you. You don't want that kind of a crossover. But everything else is just like, you know, you pick what you want to do, you decide on your name and you start making projects. Because what's good about it is, um, as far as like copyrights and stuff like that go, you have living, breathing work, you know,
Mhm.
like you always have evidence of living, breathing work. So you don't really have to worry too much. So if you want to start a production company, honestly, the best bet is to just go for it. It's one of the few business ventures a person can just like decide they're gonna do
Okay.
and go after it, in my opinion.
So
So
how did Complex come together? I mean, I don't know if that's something that just came together quickly, or it's something you've been like working on for a while, or was it just something you always wanted to try to get out there?
Complex actually started as I was coming up with ideas during the pandemic. And I wanted to write. Like I had just finished so I have my master's in screenwriting and I just finished school in 2019, like in December of 2019. And then like with the pandemic hit like a few months later. So I was like, and I had just gotten some like stuff rolling as far as an actor goes. Like I quit my day jobs and I was mostly acting and like everything was rolling. And then like the pandemic hit and like it just shut down productions. And so I wanted to be able to do something and something that I did a lot during, or that we learned a lot about during school were silent films.
Hmm.
And I wanted to do, it's interesting to have to show, not tell. You don't get when you have a silent film, like a true silent film, you don't really get a lot of you don't have the ability to dump exposition everywhere. And so I wanted to see what it would be like to write something where I can't just dump exposition and see what comes of it. So I started writing Complex, which was just, again, it was originally supposed to be a short, and then I was like, oh, I think this would be an interesting series, but there's maybe like 20 lines of dialogue in the whole thing.
Wow.
The rest of it is all, and like the only dialogue that I needed, it was like necessary dialogue. I felt like it was like not an exposition dump, but like the person has to say these things out loud. Otherwise, everything else was silent and it was mostly like even there wasn't even really music. So it was designed to be like, how much tension can I build with absolutely uh, uh with very specific and like distinct sound design. So yeah.
Yeah, it's not just going back to like the old school like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin stuff where they kind of like really paved the way for what you could really do or try that things that hadn't been tried before. But I think in like a lot of horror movies, the stuff for me that is scary or ambient or like sets a mood or with the tension building and stuff, 90% of the time it is just somebody walking through a dark forest and you hear the sound design of the forest like the
Right.
movie The Village. It's like her just walking through and she's blind and she can't see where she's going. And it's just the whole and it's daylight, but in her mind, she just hears this horrible, creepy land that she's walking through. Or, even a serial killer movie, it's just footsteps walking in like a dark warehouse and the person's just going like this because they don't know where it's coming from. I mean, some of the best X-Files episodes, I think, are like them running through like a dark building or like a dark forest and one of them's yelling like Mulder, Scully, and you just see flashlight beams. And it's like that's what you're talking about with the $400. Like you think about the millions of dollars they had for the budget for that show, and the best episodes are them with flashlights. And they could have been just filmed at like somebody's fucking like backyard or like Angela's forest or whatever, just running around with flashlights, and you're just like, really? But it's
Yeah.
tricks of the trade, like you're saying. So building on that, when it comes to horror movies, do you prefer horror movies where it's just like a guy or a girl in a mask as like a serial killer with like a weapon, or like some kind of half seen shadowy dark monster?
Um, I don't know that I have a preference. They're just both vastly different. Like you've got like your Michael Myers type things, which are, I think, a lot of fun to be able to watch. Like slasher movies are great. They're just fun. Like I don't know how else to explain it. I don't know that I ever feel super afraid during like slasher movies or like masked serial killer type things. With the exception of maybe like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that was unnerving. But a lot of the times they're really, really fun because it's kind of like a what would you do? What would you do if it, because this can be like a real scenario. This person can be directly in front of you. And, what would you do if a serial killer is after you? How do you, like one of my favorite horror movies is actually P2, which was it P2? Yeah, P2, where she's like, being victimized by the security guard who's been stalking her. Like it's like I want to say she's like a lawyer or something. She's something. She works in an office building, is coming out, and the security guard has been like watching her and stalking her, and has decided he wants to like take her, like kidnap her. And she gets free, and instead of just running away from him, she decides to fight back. And like so she's hunting the serial killer, which I love things like that. But at the same time, when you have like these sort of, I think, monster movies or like ghost stories, demon movies, all of those to me are the more scary ones because I feel like serial killers, there's kind of like oh, if you run the right direction, if you do this, but the monster movies is just kind of like, it feels like, what do you do? Like, what do you do when the world is taken over by zombies? What do you do,
Right.
you know, like when everyone's body is being snatched? Like what, like what do you do in those
I
situations? Like those
know.
are difficult.
I
Like
feel
how do
like,
you,
yeah, the ones with the serial killer ones, it's just like there's so many cliches. Like, I feel like you can have the most fun with that, especially like when you're starting out, just a person in a mask or a shadowy hood and you can't see them. And like that, I know what you did last summer. It was just like a guy in a fisherman's outfit with a rusty meat hook. You're like, meh. But it's like the tension and the way it's shot, like half in shadow, you don't know what's going to happen. But like a lot of the cliches come in there. But the monster things, I think like that just speaks to something in us, like a primordial level where it's like the fear of the unknown. And it's that thing where it's like, as a filmmaker, like, what do you do? Because if you show the creature too early in the movie and it looks like shit, if it looks really like a rubbery, like,
yeah,
you just went to Home Depot and threw some paper mache shit together or whatever, then everybody's like, wah wah, and you're like, then you got to like suffer through that last half of the movie, going like, all right, when's this over? But it's like if you can somehow make it last and just show like glimpses as you go along, then you're just like, oh my God. But it's a tough call because a lot of these movies now, I think a lot of the more recent ones, they show the creature like first 5 to 10 minutes, and it's like, well, if you kind of already 100% know what it
Yeah,
is in the first 5 to 10 minutes, you're like, meh. I mean, Jaws is like the one exception where you're like, it's a big giant fucking shark, it's gonna kill you. But
yeah,
even that, they just really just show you, like, to me, that's why the first Jaws is always going to be the best, because you don't really see the shark until the end, and it's more about like your imagination of like seeing
yeah,
like it go under that part of the pier that ripped off, and it's like turning around and coming back toward those guys, and they're trying to like climb up on the pier because in your mind you just imagine this shark is so much bigger than it really is because you
yeah,
just see dark water. And dark water, if you can't see the bottom, that's terrifying. Like, and you see that other movie, what was it, the Jason Statham one, like Meg, where it's like this shark is so fucking big, and you're like,
yeah,
dude, I can't. Like, I mean, it's you gotta get the comedy in there because you're like, come on.
yeah. You can't really take it seriously. Yeah, no, honestly, shark movies are some of the, when they're done well, are some of like the best ones, like shark attack movies, because yeah, there's really a lot of times it's like tension building. I actually really enjoyed Deep Blue Sea.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
like one of the best scenes in Deep Blue Sea is when the shark uh rises, like when they have it inside the facility and they're lowering it back down and it rises up and like, yeah. But I think what's so great about that is it's one of the few times where like seeing it actually does really work, because you're like, I see it, but it's docile. And how long will it be docile? How long will this actually, like sit? Like how it is though. You have to like find a way to like create the correct tension, and it has to either be like you don't see the monster, or the monster like the Michael Myers movies do it well in the sense of like it just is like ever present. Like Michael Myers will be like 70 yards behind you and you're just running and he's walking and you're just running and then all of a sudden he's in front of you for some reason. But it
You're
is
like,
that feeling
how did the with
you
the
know.
physics and the walk, what the you're like
Like
horror
what
movie logic.
exactly.
um, so building on that, like, do you prefer practical effects, or are you cool with like a ton of like obvious CGI in a movie?
I personally like practical effects. I mean, I'm a 90s kid though, so that it might just be that. But I always have found it really, really Um, well, I think one CGI, even with all of the like strides that it's made, it still doesn't feel quite right. Like it still doesn't quite look right. But I think when it's practical effects, when it's like actually, someone when you have like a I don't know, a blood pack underneath someone's shirt and they get shot, and that actually see that visceral response. When you look at things like Jurassic Park, where like so much of it is just like mechanics. Like I really think one, it's impressive. It's really cool to know that there's a person out there that just, or many people out there that do this. Like someone that could just build this with their hands. They put this together. And if you've ever seen like practical effects, makeup and everything put together, it's just kind of fascinating to watch someone from nothing make something
Oh yeah.
from like paint
Like
palettes and some
I'll
like,
give you two examples here that I always use that one's an older movie, one's a new movie in the same franchise, which is the John Carpenter movie The Thing with all those practical effects from the 80s. And yeah, it's an older movie and some of it hasn't aged that well, but it's so much more terrifying when you know it's something that's like grabbing on and you see it pull on somebody or actually hit somebody in the face, or they can actually go into the mouth a little bit and give and take and pull and reverse the camera and stuff like that. Or, just a prosthetic fake person being ripped apart or whatever. Now, in the prequel like looked amazing, and there was all these great Norwegian actors, and like Mary Elizabeth Winstead is giving like this like top shelf like Sigourney Weaver awesome performance. But then like once the stuff really gets going and they just do this hard turn into the CGI, then you're like, oh, man, because it's
Yeah.
like once your mind makes that decision that it's fake, then you're like, I mean, you're still riveted because of the performances. And then, like I said, the acting, the directing, the script is all great. But then anytime it's, oh, here's the monster scene, then it just, you could just tell they just lobbed in some CGI and the people were like, ah, it's over there. We got to run over here because it's over there.
Right.
So, I mean, I personally I like when it's as much practical as you can like safely do, and then maybe like little hints of CGI to kind of like cover up the zippers or whatever you have to do. But I always ask people that. So let me ask you this, someone who's worked in a lot of horror films, like what have you as an actor or creative not tried in a horror movie that you've always wanted to try, whether it was like a stunt or an action scene or some really gooey mess or something, is there anything that you saw or you've seen your friends get into where you're like, oh, I want to get in to try that?
Um, I think, I mean, I would like to be the final girl in literally any horror movie. I think it would be a lot of fun. A lot of the ones that I've done, I haven't had the chance to like do a lot of like action stunts or fighting back, which is something that you know, I am somewhat trained in, and it is a lot of fun to be able to do. Like I like that level of physicality, so I would really love to have like not like fight scenes, but like, scenes where there is actually like this person's trying to escape this very specific attack and it's just going at you. A la Jamie Lee Curtis in anything she did in her early career. I would love to do that. I think it would be a lot of fun to like stage and come up with all the different movements and just to generate the fear and the acting that you have to do while you're keeping that physicality alive and still like, maintaining safety, but like it's a really um it's pretty visceral to have to do. I've had to do it outside of the world of horror a little bit, but not as much in horror, which I would love to do.
Let me ask you this. Well, here's something that I always wanted to try in a horror movie because like I've seen it, but I haven't seen it a lot or recently. I'd like to play a character who, for whatever reason, it's like you think like there's a bunch of people getting chased by a killer or a monster, and you think that that person, like you hear them scream, and you think they get stabbed or shot or killed or whatever, and then you just write them off, and then they're not in like the second act of the movie or whatever, but then near the end of the third act, like they just show up and at first you're like, oh my God, this person is in like cahoots and they're working with the killer or whatever. But it turns out that they just spent like that whole like middle hour of the movie just trying to like get themselves healed and patched up. And they figure it out and they show up and they like help the hero. And then they kind of like have to sacrifice himself for like with the final girl or whatever. But kind of like, I think it was the first Scream movie when like you didn't see Dewey, like the David Arquette character, for
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
big
Dewey kind
chunk of it, and you're like, oh, he died. That sucks. And then he shows up later, and he's like holding his side, and he's got blood, in his hands like twitching, holding the gun. But I always think that that's really cool, and you don't really see that too much in a movie. So that's something that I would try. Let me ask you this: so, what advice would you give anyone like just starting out in filmmaking? Because even from when we were starting, just like 10 or 15 years ago, it has really changed a lot.
For someone just starting out in film, um, I guess the best advice I would give is, I guess it's like three things. One, don't wait. Like whatever it is you want to do, just do it. There is always going to be someone out there who has more money, more this, more that, more experience, whatever it is. Just do it because you're not gonna get any better at it if you don't do it. If you just sit there waiting to decide whether or not you should do it. If you look at everybody else doing it, like a lot of the times people underestimate themselves. And so just do the thing. Do the thing. Because then at the very least you've broken that ice, right?
All right. Well, with that, we'll ask the last question here, which is what's coming up next for you and where can people find your work and get a hold of you online?
Um, so the next thing that's coming up for me is probably, well, I've been working on a short film that I am like amidst writing, and then uh, hopefully me and Tracy will be getting a feature off the ground in this next year. Um, I think that we will. I feel pretty solid about it. But that's our next goal. I don't want to talk too much about that because that's also that I think, she's the main producer on that. So I would like her to spearhead how she wants to have it discussed. But and what was the other question? Like
Oh,
when
just where can people find your work online? I don't know if your production company has a website or not, and reach out to you to work on projects or this or that.
Right now you can find me on YouTube, if you want to see some of my work, and then on the Instagrams at Out of My Skin, outa underscore my underscore skin. That is where I tend to post anything that I'm in the middle of doing, and if people want to reach out to me, that's usually where I'll respond. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, this has been amazing as I knew it would be. You're awesome sauce. Thank you so much for coming on the show and nothing but wonderful things to say for you. Have a great weekend, and this will be up next Wednesday on the channel. Thank you so much, Christine. You were awesome.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on the show.
You got it. Bye bye now.
Bye.